Tigard City Council meeting to order. City Recorder Krager, please call roll.
Here.
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 Councillor Newton.
Here.
All right, I will ask everyone to stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Recorder Krager, you didn't call my name. I just wanted to say that I was here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No worries. Thank you.
I actually thought one was missing, but I was like, Carol didn't. There's no way. Got it. Okay, page break. All right, Councilor staff, any non-agenda items?
None for us, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We have no proclamations or recognitions. We'll move on to public comment. Follow-up from previous public comment, Assistant City Manager Nyland.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. At the August 23rd council meeting, we did receive the following public comment. We had one individual contact us by email requesting a burn ban. I believe you have responded to this community member several times. We also had one community member provide in-person testimony with questions about the Safe Spaces briefing. A team member provided some answers in real time during that council meeting and also followed up with a constituent the next day. We had no callers and no one provided testimony via video. So on to our fun fact. It's all about the season. You can go to the grocery store and get pumpkin spice as well as eggnog. Summer is coming to an end, though we still have a couple 90-degree days ahead of us, and we are gearing up to welcome fall, which begins in a couple of weeks. At this time last year, we walked on a proclamation about Welcoming Week. This is a week designated to celebrate a sense of belonging for everyone in our community. I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate the good work that you and Tigard are doing on that front. We have Universal Plaza, which will be a gathering place for all parts of our community. We are addressing our housing needs with much needed affordable housing so people can have an opportunity to call Tigard home. We are finessing our language access plan so we can reach out to even more community members and ensure meaningful access to. And we are in the process of hiring Tigard's first diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as our DEI manager. Though we do not have a proclamation for Welcoming Week, we are taking steps to make Tigard a welcoming city for everyone. So thank you for your good work in helping create that sense of belonging this week and every week. That is my report for this evening.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Nyland. And I would ask staff operating the technical equipment, the volume for, just like we had our last meeting in here, is too low for, at least from my perspective, on the video. So if we can get that louder for the presenters that are remote, that would be great. With that, we'll move on to written public comment. And I don't believe we received any written public comment. City Recorder Krager, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
All right. And Mr. Raimundo, do we have anyone signed up to speak in person? We do not. All right. Administrator Cleary, do we have any phone-in public comment?
Mr. Mayor, we have no phone nor video comment.
Okay, no phone or video. With that, we'll move on to Tigard Area Chamber of Commerce. Got a couple people, Jessica and Barbara. Thanks for joining. Good to see you both.
Hi, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I'm Barbara Burkhart, the new CEO of the Tigard Chamber. It's taken me quite a few months to get here, but I'm happy to be here. We have just completed our endorsement process and are actively engaged in our government affairs and public policy. So we've publicly done our endorsements. We're looking forward to working with you, Mr. Mayor, and the City Council members through the end of the year, and then the new mayor and new City Council members going forward in the coming year. So I just wanted to say hello and then pass it off to Jessica for her standing updates.
Good evening, Council. Nice to see you all today. Like mentioned last month, Leadership Tigard is starting October 11th, and we have application deadline coming up on September 22nd. So if you know of anybody that's looking to become a community leader or wants to learn more about Tigard, we encourage them to participate in our program. We are seeing recovery in the business community, and the Chamber is back up to 284 members, which is from our low. We were around 250 from the pandemic, and so we're excited to see growth back into our membership. And then we have our Government Affairs and Public Policy meeting coming up on September 15th at 1:30. And then today we welcome the Tigard Arts Academy to our community in King City over by Grocery Outlet with a ribbon cutting. And so if anybody wants to watch the ceremony, it's available. They had a special musical performance from someone from 104.1 The Fish performing today, singing. So it was a great ceremony. We host Good Morning Tigard every single Thursday at 7:30 in the morning. We are back to 100% in person, and then we have speed networking coming up on September 22nd at the Embassy Suites at Washington Square Mall. For the Tigard Farmers Market, we're open until the end of October, and so we are open from 9 a.m. till 1:30 p.m. in downtown Tigard on Tigard Street and then the Rotary Plaza. And then we are doing a trick-or-treat event at the Farmers Market on October 30th to celebrate the end of an amazing season. So save the date. And then for the Tigard Downtown Alliance, the biggest news is the Explore Downtown Tigard Street Fair is coming up this Saturday. It's from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. and that is sponsored by Barklandia. We have 140 vendors. We have live music from noon to 8 p.m. in the evening. Food vendors, beer garden, family-friendly activities, and a lot more, so we invite the community out. The Downtown Mixer is hosted on September 21st at Symposium Coffee from 5 to 7 p.m. It's a special, they're opening up just for this special occasion, so we invite everyone. And then Save the Date Trick or Treat Main Street is back as a Tigard Downtown Alliance event on Monday, October 31st. If you have any questions for me.
Well, I see one final note on your report out, and I think it's important to sort of remind the community that downtown is open despite the construction. So I know we're the ones doing the construction, so I feel obligated to mention that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Shaw?
More just comment. Thank you so much for a sheet listing all the events. Really appreciate that and keeps it front of mind.
Yes,
so thank
no
you.
problem. Thank you. Perfect.
All right. Good to see
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Parking Rules Briefing. Mr. Warren. Good to see you in person.
It's been a while. Good evening, Mayor Snyder and members of the council. My name is Skylar Warren. I'm a senior planner in the Department of Community Development. I'm here tonight to brief you on some new state rules that will require the city to make some updates to its development code and perhaps municipal code as well. I want to highlight that there is a decision point ahead for the city, and although discussion is, as always, welcome tonight, no decision is necessary at this time. I will be returning to council in 3 weeks to present more detail about the alternatives available to the city, and we will be asking for council direction at that time. Next slide, please. So the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rulemaking followed the issuance of Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04, which required state agencies to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The project was a joint undertaking of the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Oregon Department of Transportation, and brought together two long-standing goals for each of these agencies: to update the state's transportation planning rule and to reduce climate change impacts and to foster equity in the state transportation system and investments. Next slide, please. Governor Brown's order and the subsequent rulemaking were a response to the growing climate emergency and the challenge in taking bold action to address climate mitigation and adaptation at a meaningful scale. These agencies jointly were responsible for one of the areas where the greatest greenhouse gas reductions can be achieved. Nationally, the transportation sector is responsible for just over a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. In the state of Oregon, the figure is even higher at 40% of the state's GHG emissions. In addition, the transportation sector has continually increased at a higher rate than other sectors for the past 3 decades. Next slide. Despite our understanding of these issues, the state has continued to miss its greenhouse gas reduction targets, and the gap between the trend line and our goals is only projected to widen. The United Nations annual G20 emissions gap report released in October last year found that the gulf between action and needed action is widening globally, with dire climate consequences for the generations ahead. Next slide. But in climate terms, the future is now. Within just a few months of the governor's executive order in 2020, record-breaking wildfires fed by climate change impacts ripped through the state's forests. Those wildfires cost 11 Oregonians their lives and resulted in the loss of 4 towns, thousands of homes and businesses, and over 1 million acres of forest land at a cost of over $1 billion, all during the midst of the early months of the pandemic. That same year, floods in Northeast Oregon led to the death of one Oregonian, hundreds of millions in damage, and the closure of I-84 for a period of days. These flooding events are expected to increase in frequency and intensity due to the impacts of climate change. And in 2021, a record-shattering heat wave event led to the deaths of 116 Oregonians, 800 people across the Pacific Northwest, in what has been described as a mass casualty event. Next slide. We also know from years of research, some being done locally by people like Dr. Vivek Shandis of Portland State University, that extreme climate events and the impacts of climate change are disproportionately borne by those communities that have historically been marginalized, disenfranchised, and displaced, including our communities of color. In addition, we know that transportation infrastructure impacts have been historically disproportionately borne by these communities. Next slide. So the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules are intended to start the state down the road of addressing the climate emergency and these issues of equity. As I mentioned, they are primarily focused on the revision of the state's transportation planning rule. Those revisions can be divided into 2 primary areas of reform. The first is an overhaul of the way that long-range transportation planning is conducted and the types of projects that should be prioritized in that planning. The second area of reform is related to land use planning tied to transportation, primarily parking. The goal with each of these is to meet the state's greenhouse gas reduction targets. Next slide. On the land use side, some examples of the types of rules that were adopted include requiring cities to designate climate-friendly areas, to reform their parking management programs, and to support electrification of the transportation system. On the transportation planning side, the rules require that cities and counties must plan for non-vehicular modes equitably and reduce or eliminate reliance on motor vehicle congestion standards as the driving method of designing and prioritizing transportation investments. Instead, prioritization is to be partially driven by equity considerations as well as climate considerations and climate impacts. Next slide. All of these rules will have an important impact on the city's planning and investments in the coming years. But for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to focus on just one area, the parking reform requirements of the rules. Parking reform is something that the planning and design fields have been talking about for a long time, decades. We have a wealth of research and significant case studies that tell us that parking reform works and is part of building a better, more equitable urban form. Parking can be one of the larger drivers of costs for development. First, the spaces themselves are expensive to construct. One conservative estimate is that each surface parking space costs about $5,000. Structured parking is, of course, more expensive, starting at $20,000 per space and climbing depending on the complexity of the parking structure. But the costs are not all monetary in nature. There are also the land costs and the opportunity costs of excessive parking. On the right here, you can see a comparison of the typical size of a 2-bedroom apartment side by side with the size of the typical parking requirement for that unit and that would be 1.5 spaces. The parking requirement alone makes up more than half of the square footage of the dwelling unit. Put another way, every 3 spaces displaces a 2-bedroom unit. With multi-level development, the impact is even higher. So from the case studies out there, we know that removing parking requirements does not mean that parking goes away. Rather, it means that other than establishing maxima for parking, a city can allow the market to determine appropriate levels of parking on a per development basis. What we know from areas that have removed mandates altogether is that in most cases the market continues to provide this commodity. Next slide. So I'm now going to summarize some of the areas of action that we will need to be working in over the coming months, and I want to leave you with a preview of the decision point that we have ahead of us on September 27th. By December 31st of this year, we must apply the Phase 1 parking reforms. First, we must remove parking mandates near all high-frequency transit lines, so that's going to be the West Line and our 15-minute headway bus lines. In addition, we must also remove mandates for certain types of development, including shelters, small housing units, including middle housing, affordable housing, child care facilities, and facilities serving those with disabilities. And then finally, we will not be allowed to apply a minimum of more than 1 space per unit for multi-unit housing such as apartments. And while it is always preferable to change the code, we may rely on the preemptions of the state rules to apply those provisions until we have a code update prepared. Next slide. And I'm now going to highlight then by June 30th of next year, we must adopt new standards for parking lot design, development, and use. Those will include requirements to increase our tree canopy coverage standards, require solar installations, and ensure that parking areas are electric vehicle ready. We must also allow parking areas to be redeveloped into other uses and establish parking maxima. This last one is already in place through metro requirements, but may need to be updated. Next slide. I'm now going to highlight the coming decision point. Also by that June 30th deadline, we must adopt 1 of 3 reforms. And I should probably call those a package of reforms. The first one would be repealing parking mandates altogether. The second would be repealing them for a large number of development types. And the third is adopting a set of fair parking and pricing policies. Next slide. That first, and certainly the easiest, is to repeal all parking minima citywide. If this option is chosen, then the Phase 1 reforms due on December 31st, and the Phase 2 standards are made moot. No further action is necessary other than those parking area design reforms that I mentioned. The second option is to adopt 7 reforms that apply universally to certain areas of the city and to certain development types citywide. This is the medium difficulty approach and preserves some parking minima, but makes the code and the land use process potentially more complex administratively. The third option is to adopt reforms within the municipal code that would increase the regulation of parking outside of the land use process. This would include requirements that developers and property owners unbundle parking from their properties, meaning that rental units and parking spaces are rented separately. It would also require that the city adopt things like a tax on parking lot revenue and a requirement that employers within the city offer commute benefits to their employees. This is definitely the most complex of the 3. Next slide. So we are in the process right now of completing a more robust analysis that we'll present to the council on September 27th that will detail the impacts of at least the first 2 of those approaches, so Path 1 and Path 2. Because of the externalities involved in the third approach, we will not be able to provide the kind of robust economic analysis necessary to understand the impacts of that approach. That's just a product of the CFAC rules being adopted in July and some of these things being very complex taxing structures. So after the presentation that evening, we hope to have council discuss the preferred option to take so that we can begin work on this time-constrained compliance project. Next slide. And with that, I'll thank the council and take any questions.
I'll first just make sure, City Manager Reimer, can you make sure that Councilor Goodhouse is briefed on this so he's prepared for the September 27th discussion?
Yep, absolutely.
I just want to make sure he has the benefit of this since there's going to be decisions being asked. Who's got questions or comments? I have one, but I can hold it. Councilor Shaw.
Great. Thank you, Senior Planner Warner, for the presentation. A couple of questions. On the Exec Order 2004, is that, was there any funding set aside to assist cities with these mandates, or was it an unfunded mandate?
So the executive order does not come with a budgetary outlay, but the various agencies that have been involved in implementing the rules have made budget asks in the current or the forthcoming regular session. So I know, for example, both Oregon Department of Transportation and the Department of Land Conservation and Development have put forth a request for, I think it's on the order of $10 million to provide technical assistance for the implementation of the broader transportation planning aspects of this. So that would be like the transportation system plan and that kind of thing.
Great, thanks. So I hope, if I may finish, Mayor,
Of course.
that we're monitoring that, because this could be a very expensive lift for the city. So it might make sense to phase some of the aspects. And then on slide 4, when you talk about, this is just pointing something out, as a state we are missing greenhouse gas reductions, your chart shows just light duty vehicles, and the state's missing it for a variety of reasons in addition to light duty vehicles, which we now, as you know, hit the 50,000 mark, but you might want to just put a different slide up that shows the state as a whole and different aspects of the state missing its goals. Just a thought. Thank you.
Council President Lube.
Yeah, I was going to ask in general, I mean, obviously this isn't just something Tigard is grappling with. Do we have any information or any talk from other cities regionally, what they're looking at or discussions that they're having?
That's a great question. As you can imagine, this is very fast moving. I think many of the other cities that I've talked to are actually anxiously awaiting where we're going. So I don't have a good sense of where neighboring communities might be going. I do know that, based on sort of feedback from city staff or elected representatives in Milwaukee, Portland, for example, that I would expect that, Portland has already removed parking minima in most of the city, but I would expect that Milwaukee would follow suit. But that's really all I've heard.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
honestly, Council President Lube, the climate-friendly and equitable community stuff is broader than just the parking. And so I think in Hillsborough and other local jurisdictions, that's gotten a lot of, like, other things have gotten a lot of airtime too.
Yeah, but this is just so fundamentally such a big change to our code, and it completely changes the way we plan, our land use. But it also doesn't surprise me that they're looking to see what Tigard does as we've continued to be leaders in setting new code and expectations. Thank you.
Councilor Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess when I'm looking at option 1, having been a planner, it kind of makes sense to me. I remember dealing with developers, applicants who would be frustrated at our parking requirements, saying the market that isn't what the market would require. So I think that makes sense to me, the first option. And I also think it's important to focus first on areas that are near frequent transit, because I think in Tigard, where we're not served that well by transit, that could be problematic. So I would just echo that. I think that's important. I don't know how we get through that if we've got not enough parking and people are too far to take transit. So that's going to be an interesting dilemma. So thanks.
Youth Councilor Nog.
So I just had a quick question, if you have the numbers. Out of all of the 3 paths that have been suggested, do you know which one is the most climate friendly and which one would cut down the most?
That's a great question. And I don't think that there is any kind of analysis out there to that effect. I would say that the way the rules were written, the state is definitely guiding municipalities toward the repeal of all parking minima. And I think the thinking there is that parking can induce demand for transportation facilities. Parking lots can create problems with heat island effect. And I think there's also just the cost and equity issue about displacing potential development, whether it's commercial development or residential development, with required parking spaces that the market doesn't support. So I think we've all probably been to a shopping center that has the right amount of parking for holiday shopping, but the rest of the year those spaces are sitting unused. So I think the state is definitely, I think if the way the rules were written, if they had a preference, it would be to repeal all minima, and the other options were offered as alternatives after testimony was received from cities that they didn't think they could repeal all minima.
The general principle here, it sounds like, being that the market will take care of itself, which probably was true to begin with these regulations, right? I mean, that, especially with all the examples we can give where there's either not enough or too much. Is that the general kind of overarching belief now in the planning community, or the way the state's approaching this is just let the market do it? It'll do it better than we can anyway?
What I've learned over the years from hearing from cities at conferences that have repealed parking minima, hearing from professionals who are working on development in those areas, the real driver for parking provision is what the tenants want, and generally tenants are wanting an off-street parking space. And the other thing is financing. So when a development is completed, most developers exit at some point, and the property is refinanced. During that refinancing stage, the banks want to see that parking is provided because their money is at risk, and they want to see that the development is successful. So developers have an amazing incentive at the construction phase and the design phase to provide adequate parking for their developments. If there's not nearby transit, if there's not convenient access to shopping within walking distance, if there's not a bike trail nearby, they're going to have a lot of problem selling the development that they've built to someone who would be the eventual operator of it. So I think there is some fairly robust, not just academic studies around this, but also case studies of cities that have done this. And we're really seeing the momentum pick up even in mid-sized cities across the U.S. I think Ann Arbor was the most recent, just in the last month, to repeal their parking minimum.
The other question I have is about, in your sort of path 3, you indicated that that would, I think you actually used the word must, not in writing necessarily, but verbally, that we must tax parking lot revenue, or we would need to figure that out, like how to tax it. And I guess that was an assumption. I didn't fully understand why it must be, because there's something I'm missing about why it must be taxed, or what was the thinking there?
In the third option, I did say must, but what we actually are required to do is adopt 3 of the 5. So that would include unbundling the parking for residential developments. So you come to rent an apartment, you sign your lease. Separately, you decide to rent a parking space from the developer. One of the other 5 things that's on the menu is taxing parking lot revenue. Another one.
Okay, so that's specific to the adopt 3 of 5.
Correct.
Okay, sorry I misunderstood. I'm glad I asked that question though, because I was like, okay. I mean, normally there needs to be, what would be the purpose of that tax and the reason it's part of the 3 of 5? Like, what's it going to be used for?
The rules do not provide any kind of guidance on what the tax is used for. I think the goal is just to
Is it to disincentivize that?
disincentivize
Okay.
parking lots.
So it doesn't say how much it must be taxed, just that it must be taxed.
You know, I'd have to dive into the rules to see if there's some
It just seems-
specifics around.
It seems odd to me, but
It is odd, and then similarly, the requiring commuter benefits for all local businesses. I hope I'm not, spoiling too much about the 27th, but, the Path 3 is a very cumbersome route, not just in terms of what we need to build in code, but what we would have to build administratively to enforce these various mandates.
sounds like you're giving a little preview about that night now, or where we may be headed in your recommendation, perhaps. Okay. Other questions or comments? And you'll make sure Counselor Goodhouse gets briefed, or Mr. Warren, I don't know if you want to brief him or how you guys want to handle that, but I want him to come into the 27th meeting with the same sort of background we all have.
So I can offer that I will be briefing the Tigard Transportation Advisory Committee tomorrow evening with this same slideshow, and Councilor Goodhouse, as the liaison to that committee, could be there. So
Yeah, the reason he's out today may be I would guess he won't be there, but either way, it needs to happen.
we will make it happen.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything further on this? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we'll move on to item number 5 on our agenda, which is a quasi-judicial public hearing, Trojan Storage Comprehensive Plan Amendment, Zone Change, Conditional Use Permit and Adjustments. I need to open the public hearing. Hearing procedure, City Attorney Rahala, you want to read the quasi-judicial hearing procedures, please?
All right, this is a quasi-judicial land use proceeding. Council's decision must be based on the following substantive criteria. Tigard Community Development Code Chapters 18-120, 18-310, 18-320, 18-410, 18-420, 18-710, 18-715, 18-740, 18-810, 18-910, 18-920, and 18-930. Tigard Comprehensive Plan Goals 1, 2, 9, 11, 12, and 15. Statewide Planning Goals 1, 2, 9, 11, and 12. And Metro's Growth Functional Management Plan Title I. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the relevant approval criteria described in the staff report or other criteria in the plan or land use regulation that apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue clearly enough so that council understands and can address the issue precludes an appeal to LUBA on that issue. Failure of the applicant to object to a condition of approval may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Members of the City Council will be asked whether they have any conflicts of interest. If a council member has an actual conflict, the council member cannot participate. Council members must declare any contacts about this case with a member of the public. Council members must also declare if they have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. A council member who describes ex parte contacts or independent information shall state whether the contact has impaired their impartiality or ability of the member to vote on the matter. Any person may challenge the participation of a council member or rebut any statements made during the public comment period. The council member in question may respond to such a challenge.
Thank you, City Attorney Rahala. Any members of the council have any conflicts of interest or ex parte contact they need to declare? Councilor Shaw?
I don't think I need to declare this, but I'm the liaison to the Planning Commission, so I did attend the Planning Commission's meeting that discussed this issue, so just want
Okay.
City Attorney Rowley, you do know that.
Anything further? City Attorney Rahala, does that present a problem?
No, thank you.
Concern? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the staff report. I do want to make sure, Senior Planner Lindor, can we test your audio first before you start to just make sure we have that resolved?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that's better. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and fellow councilors. My name is Agnes Lindor, Associate Planner. Let me get my presentation up here. Can everyone see that?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so tonight's public hearing is for Trojan Storage Phase 3. The proposal includes 2 parcels that are located along Hall Boulevard. This is Hall Boulevard here, and Pacific Highway is down here. So as you can see, the 2 lots have frontage on Southwest Hall, and then they terminate at the end of Warner. However, Warner will be punched through to connect through to Hall. The lots are approximately 0.64 acres. The current zone is mixed-use central business district, MUCBD, and the proposed zone is CG, general commercial. And the site is currently vacant. So this is just the comprehensive map that shows the current designation of MUCBD and the proposed designation of CG, general commercial, as well as the zoning map. Again, current zone is MUCBD, and the proposed zone is CG. So the application also includes a conditional use permit, 2 adjustments, and a lot line adjustment to consolidate 2 lots into 1. So based on the site plan, you can see Hall Boulevard is down here. This would be the new extension from Warner to Hall. The proposal includes 2 buildings, the first one being office and residence up at the corner. That's 2 stories. And then this building back here that actually contains the storage units that are the storage units in that, solely in that building. So this is just an elevation of the proposal. I wanted to highlight some of the design elements that have been incorporated into the building design. So the building placement, as you can see, is at the street to kind of create a pedestrian environment. It has a lot of glazing on all the street-facing facades on both buildings. The main entrance is right here with weather protection. There's also going to be a public bench that you may not be able to really see it, but it's along here, along Hall, along the frontage of the site. And then lastly, the preservation of the existing native oak tree in the front here. So there were no public comments that were submitted on this proposal. The staff recommendation to Planning Commission was based on the proposal providing sufficient detail to demonstrate how it complies with the comprehensive plan policies, the applicable comprehensive plan policies, statewide planning goals, Metro Title 8, and that all of the applicable development code criteria and standards are met or can be met through conditions of approval. And lastly, that there are adequate public facilities to serve the proposed development. So then based on staff's recommendation, the Planning Commission recommendation was to also recommend approval to City Council. And this would be approval of the comprehensive plan map amendment, the zoning map amendment, conditional use permit, 2 adjustments, and a lot line adjustment subject to the conditions in the staff report. Before I conclude my presentation, I did want to address an email from Councilor Newton that was submitted earlier today asking whether the site is located within the city center TIF district, and whether this map amendment would set a precedent for other properties trying to basically rezone out of the downtown zone. So the answer to being in the TIF district, that is correct. Yes, these two properties are in the TIF district. However, this application does not impact whether they're in the TIF district or not. They're going to remain in the TIF district. So the rezone or comp plan amendment don't affect whether they are or not. And then the second question, I talked with our downtown redevelopment manager, who's Sean Fairley, a little bit about this and that question. And this area is kind of unique in the sense that it's really cut off from downtown. It's cut off by Highway 99, but also Pacific Highway, Highway 99, and also, Hall Boulevard. So it's unlikely that the redevelopment in this area would be pedestrian-oriented, mixed-use, kind of the vision that we have for the core of downtown. And then lastly, he also did mention that the redevelopment that is happening with this project will add to the TIF district income to be able to fund other planned projects. And Tom, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that. If not, this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Was that to Tom McGuire that you were asking?
Yes, sorry, yes, Tom McGuire.
Do you have anything to add?
Good evening, Mayor Snyder and City Councilors. I do not have anything to add. I think Senior Planner Lindor covered that well.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to questions of staff. Be careful we're not deliberating now.
Planner Lindor, my question really wasn't related to whether it would go out of the TIF district. I know that a zone doesn't affect that. My question really related to, we've got properties within the downtown urban renewal district across Hall. We've got several properties on the edge of the urban renewal district, downtown district. And I'm just wondering if we could see an erosion of the zoning and the around the edges. So we put all these properties in the downtown urban renewal district for a reason. The zoning for downtown is written in such a way to encourage certain type of development. So my question wasn't really about the district. My question was really about the zoning, and if we might want to think about how this potentially could set a precedent for other properties around the edges not being removed from the district. It's a good thing we're going to get the tax revenue, but being zoned differently so that we get a different type of development. And I just brought that up because I didn't see that addressed in the report, and I just wondered about that. You know, if we have other properties that might make the same case, and then we've got different kinds of development than what we originally intended in the downtown, because we did put those properties in the downtown for a reason. So thanks.
This is Tom McGuire, Assistant Community Development Director. Councilor Newton, I'm happy to answer that question in more detail. I don't see this as precedent setting. Number one, because of its kind of unique location where it is, its unique relationship to the existing storage facility there. So, you know, it's kind of an expansion of an existing business that's already there. We're going to be looking at when the Tigard Made project comes to you eventually with proposals. We're looking at the zoning around the edges of downtown. You know, when the plan was first done, we had particular ideas and thoughts of where it's most appropriate to add the downtown CBD zoning. And I think over time, you know, we see the market effects in different ways. And I don't see this, again, as a precedent-setting thing, but I think maybe this particular location isn't isn't, best appropriate for that downtown zone in that location. So I don't, I don't have a crystal ball, but I really don't see it as a precedent setting thing, and us suddenly getting a bunch of these coming in.
That's helpful. I just noticed it wasn't addressed in the staff report, and that concerned me. So I didn't know if it would have been important to put a sentence or two in there summarizing what you just said. I agree with your analysis, but it wasn't included, and I'm just thinking down the road we might want to make sure that we're clear about why we think this is an appropriate change. Thanks.
All right, so you've got that adequately. Okay, any other questions of staff? Councillor Shaw.
Great, thank you. Just in the report, there is mention of an emergency access on Hall Boulevard. Is that with Warner connecting to Hall? I was just curious where that, do they expect to use it? Is it connecting to Warner? If anyone has an
Or
answer.
something else?
Or something else.
Yeah, so the emergency access was approved. It's actually on the north part of the lot, so it would be on the opposite side of where Warner is punched through. And that was approved, I believe, and Joe W. Might know a little bit more on the history, but I believe that was approved as a emergency access because of phase 2. They needed 2 entrances. So that was the reason why, and it's still going to remain. It's going to be gated.
Joe, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, good evening. This is Joe Wisniewski, city engineer. Just to add on, all the frontage improvements, access improvements, including the emergency access, are all part of a previous land use decision for phase 2, which is CUP 2016-5. They did update their access in TIA traffic impact analysis report for this submittal, but everything was previously approved and will be accounted for as part of phase 2.
Councilor Shaw, anything further? Okay. Council President Lubin, anything? Okay. All right. I think that concludes staff report and our questions about the staff report. With that, I will move us on to applicant testimony. Please join us up here. Make sure you turn the microphone on. You'll get a little green color underneath there once you turn the microphone on. There you go.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder, members of the council. For the record, my name is Mike Connors, and I'm a land use attorney with Hathaway Larson LLP. With me here today and co-presenting via Zoom is the president and owner of Trojan Storage, Brett Henry. We're going to kind of tag team our presentation. Mr. Henry is going to talk a little bit about the project, the impetus for the project, a little bit about the company, and I'm going to briefly address the approval standards. So with that introduction, Brett, why don't you go ahead and start?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members for having me. If you go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit about us. We are a private business, about 3.5 million square feet and 40 storage facilities, including 6 in the Oregon area. We really pride ourselves in best-in-class storage. The facility we purchased in Tigard that I'll mention in a minute, we've already upgraded it heavily with both security as well as the aesthetics of it. And we're looking forward to the next phase. If you could go to the next slide, please. So just real quick, phase 1 was built in 2012. It's about 50,000 square feet. Phase 2, we're about to pull the building permit for, and it will be under construction very quickly. And then phase 3 is in red. You can see the EVA access on the kind of the left side. That's the north side of the property, including the new roadway that's going to come on the south side of the property. And this is a very small addition to what's already there. Next slide, please. Like I said, the first facility was built in 2010. It's 95% occupied. It was very plain. When we bought it, we upgraded it, both security and looks. I purchased the property with approved plans for phase 2. We didn't like how that looked, so we started working with your senior planner Linder on a new, more enhanced building, and went back through the planning for that. And then we purchased phase 3, which really was going to allow us to kind of take a dead-end property and bring it forward so it's both on the freeway and on Hull Boulevard. And just a note on this, phase 3 only adds about 13,800 square feet, which is about 10% of the overall capacity. So I wanted to emphasize that the main goal of this wasn't really to expand my property. It was to expand us and get our office out on the street and be more in the community. Next slide, please. So in this chart on the very bottom highlights that. You can see the first 2 phases are about 117,000 square feet. And we just, kind of filled in the green space and brought the office and the caretaker's unit out to the main roadway. Next slide, please. And just for reference, the very left is how phase 2 started when I got there. Lots of graffiti, just kind of big green and red Christmas tree there. We immediately spent time kind of upgrading it, put professional signage on it, painted it. And then our phase 2, there's some images of it. There's the bottom right corner is the freeway side. Originally, that was an all green metal facade that ran the entire way with no architecture, no break, no color, and no windows. And these are some of the additions we've made to that phase. Next slide, please. And then we really did work with staff with the goal of first activating Hull Boulevard, really having some engagement, really putting out a nice, sleek, modern, lots of glass entrance out on the street. We are working hard on the retention of the existing large oak tree. And then again, we've already dedicated a large portion of this parcel to the connector road as part of phase 2. Storage, per the conversation you just had, generates very, very little traffic, so it's got a very low impact on the neighborhood. Storage is really at an all-time high with some of the changes that COVID has brought with work at home and kind of a hybrid office. And then again, I just want to reemphasize that we're really not trying to maximize this. This is really about bringing and connecting our property and not just having a dirt lot in front of us. Next slide, please. And then you can just kind of partial through these. I thought Senior Planner Lindor really hit this. There's the bench she mentioned on the front and all the glass and different materials that we're going to be using. And there's your, it doesn't look like an oak tree, but it's an oak tree. And then we'll be using, the proper landscaping, water resistant, things like that, even though it doesn't look like that at the moment. Next slide. And then I'll turn it over to Mr. Connors there, and I'll let him go from here.
Thanks, Brett. Again, for the record, Mike Connors. I'm just going to quickly go over some of the key approval standards. I promise not to go into too much detail since I know you have a pretty extensive Planning Commission recommendation staff report. But as you've heard, we have 4 applications. One is for comprehensive plan and zoning map amendment, conditional use permit, because the self-storage facility is conditional use in the CG zone. We have 2 minor adjustments, which I'll address in a little bit more detail. My presentation, and then a lot consolidation. So 4 applications. City staff recommends approval, did so with the Planning Commission, continues to do so now. Planning Commission heard this at public hearing, unanimously voted to recommend approval to the City Council, and we're fine with all the conditions of approval that have been recommended by staff and the Planning Commission. So on the next slide, please. So on the comprehensive plan zoning map amendment, so the phase 1 property, which is already built and under operation, that is a non-conforming grandfathered use that's located on that property, which is zone MUCBD. The MUCBD zone does not allow for self-storage facilities. So the phase 2, which has already been approved but is going to be under construction, that is currently zone CG. And so the main purpose for the zone change request in this case is predominantly to allow this use, because it's not allowed in the MUCBD district, and to enable us to be able to incorporate the 3 phases of the overall project. I think Brett did a good job of explaining how what we're really trying to do here is not maximize the number of storage units, but really bring it out onto the street, more pedestrian friendly, more of a visually appealing type of development. And so that's the real purpose for this. Councilor Newton, to answer your question about what makes this unique, I think there are a few things that are unique here. The first and foremost thing, I think, which you've heard, is that this is an expansion of an existing use, and understanding that at least the phase 2 is currently a zone commercial general as well, and so we're just really expanding that aspect of it. The second thing is it is adjacent to 2 CG properties currently. You have the phase 2 property to the east, as well as the property immediately to the north. So it really kind of fits in with the current zoning there. And then the last thing that I would say is unique is that this is really at the edge of the MU CBD district. I understand that at some point you got to draw a line somewhere, right? You can always have kind of creep, but this is the last property on this section of the MU CBD. So I think to the extent you have other applicants who may come and say, hey, we want to do what Trojan Storage did, you'll have the ability to distinguish it, to say, well, that was at the very edge, that was to make it consistent with 2 adjoining zones, and more importantly, as part of an overall project. The chances of somebody having an existing use, similar circumstances looking to expand, I would submit is going to be relatively unlikely. But that's the reason that we believe it's unique, and really the driver here is to create a comprehensive development as opposed to do a spot zone change, for a particular one-off or singular use. Next slide, please. And this is a map that you already saw, and it's just reiterating what I just mentioned, which is the surrounding properties are also zone CG, so it kind of fits in with the surrounding area. Next slide, please. So on the conditional use permit, we meet or exceed all the approval standards. Brett had a part of his slide, a show of what the approval requirements are and how we meet or exceed those. You can also find that in the Planning Commission recommendation on page 25, a chart that kind of talks about it. But, ticking off some of the highlights, the design is much more upscale than required in the code. There's no pedestrian-oriented requirements, but in working with your staff, they really encouraged us. If you guys want to expand this development, you want to make it really look good, and you're going to have a presence on Hall, I think it's going to be really important to give it an upscale, modern, pedestrian-friendly type of design, and that's what we really strive to do, and make it cohesive with the existing and the to-be-built phase 2 part of the project. Landscaping, 15% is a requirement. We have 19, close to 20%. And then on the tree canopy, the requirement is 33%. We're going to be at 83%. So that gives you an idea of how we exceed a lot of these standards. It's also low impact use because it's self-storage, so you don't get a lot of traffic volume, don't have a lot of impact on your utilities, and all the agencies that commented on it said that there's plenty of capacity to accommodate this particular use. And then the connector, it's not necessarily part of the phase 3, but the connector bringing Warner Avenue out to Hall Boulevard, I think is going to be a real benefit. That's part of the phase 2 approval, but I think once we add the phase 3, it will really look good all together and address that particular issue. Next slide, please. So I want to just briefly address 2 adjustments that we're asking for, and the first one is to the minimum parking space requirements, and I guess our timing was good tonight. We really appreciate that presentation before, and I don't mean that to be facetious, but I do think that there were some good points made, and that is that we have a lot of these codes that are developed, and planners are trying to put together these figures based on parking ratios and sort of get set in the code. But the parking ratio requirements for self-storage are pretty high in the city. And if you look at what we've built in phase 1 and was approved, that's a lower ratio if you compare the number of storage units to the number of parking spaces. What was approved and planned in phase 2, similarly. So what we're proposing here is 4 spaces for the 106 spaces, but the ratio is actually greater than what was approved in phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 is about 95% capacity. We know from that parking is sufficient. And if you look at the traffic impact analysis we provided, you're talking 10 daily trips, weekday trips. So you can see if there's 10 visitors per day, that 4 spaces is going to be more than enough. And having the different parking spaces with all 3 phases, to the extent there are any issues, that would be the overflow in the other phases. And we provided a CTS engineer's parking study, also some industry standards. And I think at least the Planning Commission staff indicated that other self-storage facility providers have also similarly asked for these kind of adjustments, because the feeling is that the parking needs are less than what's required in the code. The second adjustment relates to the public entrance standard requirements. You know, your code requires that public entrances be visible and accessible from the public street and be at an angle no greater than 90%. We meet that for the office, but for building C, we do not. And the reason that we do not, and why we're asking for an adjustment, is that that building, you know, one of the keys to self-storage is security, right? Our customers need to know that when they put their stuff there, that it's going to be a secure facility, it's going to be fenced, there's going to be somebody there monitoring it. So that's part of the self-storage thing, that's in a secure location. So people have to come in through the main entrance in order to get there. So really it didn't make sense at that point to provide an entrance or make it visible or meet those angles, because we're really not trying to encourage people to use any entrance other than the main entrance through the office. And that's the request for that particular adjustment. And that covers those 2. Next slide, please. And the last request is probably the easiest of all. It's 2 lots. We're looking for a lot consolidation because the buildings would straddle the 2 property lines, which you can't have under your code, so you do a lot consolidation. Most of the standards don't even really apply because of the circumstances for which we're requesting it, but to those that do apply, we've demonstrated compliance with all those standards. Next slide, please. And so, you know, with that, as we indicated, we really do feel that this phase 3 part of the project is really going to improve the overall project and connect with phase 1 and 2 and give that sort of pedestrian-oriented, pedestrian-friendly kind of development. It's going to be an upscale, modern, pedestrian-friendly kind of design architecture that hopefully you can use to maybe encourage other similar providers to meet that kind of a standard. It can be a model for you, we hope, at least we think it is. Meets or exceeds all approval standards, and as you know, the Planning Commission staff both support approval. So with that, we would respectfully ask that you approve our project and the application subject to staff and Planning Commission's proposed conditions of approval. And with that, I can answer any questions, or Brett, that you may have.
Thank you, Mike. I think I have a question for Brett, probably. At least I think it'll go to him. Are phase 2 and 3 going to be built at the same time or nearly at the same time? Or you're referring to them, I think, in phases because that's when you've had approval to do the projects. But are they going to be built simultaneously or nearly close to that?
We're not simultaneously for the beginning, but it's such a small project in the front that we've already started our grading CDs, because that's probably the thing we want to kind of deal at the same time if we can, or close to it. So there's going to be some overlap, but phase 2 should take us about 12 months, and I would think phase 3 maybe 7 or 8 months. So we're kind of hoping we can, you know, end them the same, but we still need construction documents for phase 3 that we haven't started yet all the way. And so there's going to be overlap, but they won't start together.
Yeah, but you're not going to have one phase and then wait 3 or 4 years or something like that. Okay.
No, intent is right away. We've already issued this prematurely, the CD for the civil. So it's to get it done right away.
Okay, thank you. Other
You're welcome.
questions of the applicant? No? Okay. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your time.
Let's see, do we have any response to testimony by staff? Oh, I'm sorry. Public testimony. Important part here. I wrote my notes over the top. Sorry about that. Let's see, we did not get any written public comment, I don't believe, did we?
No, we did not.
Okay. And Mr. Cleary, do we have any callers in the queue to testify by phone or video?
Mr. Mayor, there are no video or call or testimony.
All right. So response to testimony by staff. Senior Planner Lindor, anything?
I don't have anything further to add. Thank you.
Okay. And Any rebuttal to testimony by the applicant? Probably. No. All right, I'll close the public hearing. Council consideration of ordinance 22-08. Would anyone like to speak or ask questions? Councilor Newton?
Wanted to finally say, the reason I brought that up is about the zoning change is it's not really a criteria, but I was concerned down the road if we didn't have something in the record. Assistant Director, I think McGuire, I think captured it very well, but there was nothing in the record about what makes this property unique and why you know, it wouldn't be precedent setting. So I scoured and I couldn't find anything that required us to have a finding on it, but I thought it was important that it be on the record so that future applications, if they come in, we have something on the record that talks about why this is a unique situation. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, or if there aren't, a motion would be helpful. Council President Lube?
I move to approve ordinance number 22-08.
And I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right. City Recorder, please read the number and title of the ordinance.
Ordinance number 22-08. An ordinance adopting comprehensive plan amendment CPA 2021-00003 and zone change ZON 2021-0001 to amend the Tigard Comprehensive Plan designations and zoning map from MUCBD to CG on tax lots 1 South 135 DD 01300 and 1 South 135 DD 01400. The ordinance also approves a conditional use permit, CUP 2021-00003, 2 adjustments, ADJ 2021-00023 and ADJ 2022-00008, and a lot line adjustment, LLA 2022-00010, for the construction of a self-service storage facility.
Thank you, City Recorder. And with that, will you please conduct a roll call vote?
Councilor Shaw,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Councilor Goodhouse, who's absent, Councilor Newton,
Yes.
Council President Lube.
Yes.
All right. Ordinance is adopted unanimously with those present at the meeting. Thank you very much. And I also want to really thank you and the applicants for working with our staff about making this a pedestrian-friendly street sort of view. That's not something you probably had to do, as you pointed out, but I think it'll be good for the business, and we appreciate it. So thank you. All right, and with that, we have no non-agenda items. City Manager Reimer, administrative report.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, councilors, members of the community, and my teammates. Just want to provide you a few updates today. First and foremost, we have released our latest Talking Tigard podcast, and it's 2 of our PSAB members that are on that, Emilio Calderon and Valerie Sasaki, talking about their experiences. So we'd encourage all of you and the members of the community just one more glimpse into PSAB and the great process that we've celebrated recently. So a chance to listen to that. I also want to say thanks to the chief and all of our police department for inviting me to a great event this afternoon as we recognized many of our teammates and welcomed a new teammate. But to start, one of our officers was also returning from 8 months at the Navy basic training, which is Officer Bugnevath. She was gone for 8 months, so we want to say congratulations to her and thank you for her service and continuing, and now she's back, and so we appreciate that. We also had our most recent officer sworn in, Ryan Ullman, was sworn in today. He's starting what's called phase 0 because the academy doesn't start until February, but we will be starting to work with him, and he'll begin to learn our organization, our community, and go through some of the training that we can provide in-house here for him. So welcome to our newest member. Also, as you might expect, day in and day out, our officers do great work. And so today the chief recognized many of them for a couple different instances. One was First Officer Gregston for a life-saving medal this was an August 16th response to a CPR call. He was the first one on the scene. He quickly assessed the situations the chief shared, and he began chest compressions while he waited for paramedics to arrive. After about 90 seconds, he assessed that the individual was still not breathing. He continued his chest compressions until the subject began to breathe and the paramedics arrived. His quick actions and skillful applications of CPR saved this individual's life. So kudos to him for that. As the chief said today, it never gets old or tiring to present these medals, and our officers step forward and have a successful outcome like that. So kudos to Officer Gregston. And the next one was for a large group of our teammates in the criminal investigations and the commercial crimes unit. This goes back a couple years ago, and we're recognizing them today. And so it's Monty Fox, Kevin Dresser, Yonsu Lee, Dave Hawken, Kristen Rennell, Dave Swain, Nyla Polson, and our crime analyst, Gayla Christopher. So this goes back to the beginning of a homicide that started at the beginning of the pandemic, actually. And so this started with very little evidence, is the way I understand it, and they had to really work to develop their leads. And so some of the stats that the chief shared today were this included 12 search warrants they had to have, 160 hours of surveillance video that they reviewed. They networked with 20 other law enforcement agencies to develop and arrest, to develop who the suspect was. They traveled across state lines into a COVID hot zone during this time, and ultimately in November of 21, this case went to trial, and the suspect was convicted of murder and received a 25-year sentence. So once again, just great work. Chief also mentioned that some other agencies commended us for the work that our officers did, the professionalism and the great work that they did. So just want to say thank you to all of them for their efforts. And once again, like I said, it's really symbolic of the things that happen day in and day out in this organization. Just a couple other things. Other great things happen here as well, and story time at the library is one of them. And so we're expanding that here in the fall. It'll now be available for babies, toddlers, and families. Anyone interested can go to our website to find the dates and times for that. Just to bring closer to our summer meal program, this is the one that the library team just really sprung into action once we learned there's a gap. We ended with just under 1,300 meals served this year. So once again, great work by the team on that. And as I shared with you in an update last week, our library hours will be shortened just a little bit on Fridays coming up, starting this week from 10 to 6. And just to make sure that we have the resources to apply to busier times within the library. And then just the last couple things to get involved with as a volunteer. Our street cleanup on Hall Boulevard with the Climate Champions is scheduled for September 18th from 1 to 3. And then for any information, you can talk to Nicole or our youth counselor on that cleanup. And so that concludes my report tonight, and thank you for another great meeting.
What time is the cleanup on the 18th?
1 to 3.
1 to 3.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, City Manager Reimer. And we do not have an executive session scheduled. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.